Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, one man accused of being the source behind 250,000 potential news stories.
Free Bradley Manning!
The case of Bradley Manning versus the U.S. military. Iran's state-run TV channel does it again, broadcasting another alleged spy making another alleged confession. It's picture time at The Listening Post. Award-winning news photographs and the stories behind them. And the alternative version of the Bradley Manning story in song. Our web video of the week. We begin this week with Iraq and the confluence of two news stories, the withdrawal of the last U.S. forces from the country and the case of Bradley Manning. Manning, a U.S. soldier once based in Iraq, is alleged to be the source of all those WikiLeaks stories. The Iraq and Afghan war logs, those U.S. diplomatic cables, and that video of a U.S. helicopter attack in Baghdad. One striking aspect of the Manning story is how much coverage his alleged leaks attracted in the news media compared to how little coverage his legal case is now getting in the U.S. His lawyer says Bradley Manning was locked in solitary confinement for up to 23 hours a day and psychologically tortured. Manning's commander-in-chief, President Obama, has already effectively declared him guilty, which raises questions about how fair any trial can be. And then there are the implications that this case could have on whistleblowers in the U.S. Our starting point this week is Fort Meade in Maryland, the military base, where the Manning case is being heard.
The curious thing about the coverage of Bradley Manning's case has been how little coverage there's been.
When there is coverage, it's very much brought to you through the lens of the state.
They treated Manning as though he's one of the world's worst traitors.
I think this is a perfect test for the media and for the freedom of the press.
If the Bradley Manning case is a test for the U.S. media, it is one they are failing, and have been failing ever since Manning's lawyers first revealed the conditions of his imprisonment. He has spent 18 months waiting for a court date, half of that in solitary confinement.
Free Bradley Manning!
He is punished before he is even tried. You can compare how he has been treated to what happens at Guantanamo in the United States. That's exactly what's happened to Bradley Manning. You can't even say that the media has taken a position very much because they hardly cover it.
This young man was tortured in Quantico under the guidance of our Marine Corps. He was subjected to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment and punishment. There are egregious violations here that have already happened. Our system of law has really been prostituted, ostensibly because, quote, after 9/11, everything changed.
Remember, Manning has been detained in conditions that even the New York Times suggested were very similar to what the United States would do to prisoners in Guantanamo. This would be an outrage, and should be an outrage, I think, in any other context. Here it's the subject of very little press attention and very little condemnation.
The New York Times did publish an editorial critical of Manning's treatment, but that was 9 months ago, and there's been very little coverage since, especially when compared with the British newspaper The Guardian, which live-blogged Manning's entire legal hearing, covering it in a way that no U.S. media outlet did.
And you would think the journalists would be extremely grateful to Bradley Manning and WikiLeaks for having exposed to the world so much newsworthy information. And yet they're not. They are a very nationalistic press corps in the United States.
Remember the guy who called himself Bradass 87?
Court-martialed on 22 counts, including aiding the enemy.
They are trying to turn it all back on the Army.
The coverage has been extremely unsympathetic for the last 18 months, including into this hearing.
The investigation into Private Manning's alleged leaking of tens of thousands of top-secret documents has led one member of Congress to say he'd support capital punishment of Private Manning.
Manning is a classic case of a whistleblower. The problem in this case is that the secrets that he reveals are very critical and very damaging to U.S. interests. So champions of the First Amendment have said Manning is a hero for exposing these secrets.
Is there a way to quantify the importance of this case in terms of our ability to know what our government is doing in our name?
Media outlets that are a little bit closer to the government and I think feel more of a kinship with political elites have a very different view. And I think this is coming across loud and clear.
One of the hallmarks of how whistleblowers in the United States are treated is to try and destroy the personal credibility of the whistleblower in order to undermine the importance of the leaks and to distract from them.
Whoever leaked all those State Department documents to the WikiLeaks website is a traitor and should be executed or put in prison for life.
The Manning case is even more extreme because the crimes that he has exposed have been almost completely ignored in coverage of his trial.
Among the stories, Bradley Manning is accused of getting out through WikiLeaks on Iraq alone. We saw the 2007 helicopter attack in Baghdad that killed at least 12 Iraqis, including children and journalists. We heard the cockpit audio.
All right, I hit him.
It did the trigger man no credit. We learned that 15,000 more Iraqi civilians had been killed than the U.S. government had admitted to, and that U.S. authorities had failed to investigate hundreds of reports of abuse, rape, torture, and murder involving coalition forces. And those Americans celebrating their troops pulling out of Iraq, who should they thank for that? President Obama or Bradley Manning?
Why is the U.S. pulling out now? Why is President Obama pulling out now? Because Iraq refused to grant U.S. soldiers immunity who remained in Iraq. And why is that? Well, I think it can very much be credited to WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, which exposed what U.S. soldiers were doing.
The Obama administration wanted to leave troops in Iraq past the 2011 deadline, but was willing to do so only if the Maliki government agreed to extend legal immunity to U.S. troops on Iraqi soil. The Maliki government, by all accounts, wanted to give that legal immunity, but was prevented from doing so in large part by disclosures of diplomatic cables that described an extremely horrific incident in 2006, and it was all over the news in Iraq, and that prevented the Maliki government from extending the legal immunity to the U.S. troops. That was a condition to leaving the troops there. So there was incredible amounts of good that these disclosures brought about beyond even just informing the world about what took place, and yet all of that has been entirely ignored virtually by the establishment American media when they've bothered to cover the Manning hearing at all.
Part of the reason for that is this.
The battlefield consequences of the release of these documents are potentially severe and dangerous.
When the first of the war logs came out via WikiLeaks and later attributed to Manning, then U.S. Defense Secretary Gates told a congressional committee that by revealing the names of Afghans collaborating with coalition forces, lives were put at risk. That got plenty of coverage. The news that followed did not.
Carl Levin, to his credit, the chair of that committee, said, well, Mr. Gates, please give me a memo on that. Memo comes 6 weeks later. It says, well, contrary to our worst fears, there really hasn't been any damage. Nobody's been arrested or killed or even spat upon as far as we can tell. There ain't no evidence that anyone was hurt because of this, except the war effort. Bradley Manning deserves a medal, not lifetime in prison.
That a government is prosecuting a whistleblower is not really news. It's what governments do, and not just in the United States. What is newsworthy is that the same news outlets in the U.S. that feasted on Bradley Manning's alleged leaks to sell papers, boost ratings, and perhaps even help end an unpopular war are now giving this story such scant coverage. After all that time spent in solitary, Bradley Manning is still very much alone, confined to the back pages, the margins of news. Our Global Village voices now on the coverage of the Bradley Manning case.
A soldier has the duty to disobey illegal orders under any and every circumstance. Private Bradley Manning honorably upheld this principle, yet he is not being portrayed as the hero that he is. American media, for its part, is largely to blame. American media insists acting as a tabloid and investigating irrelevant, insignificant details like Bradley Manning's sexual orientation.
The big media powerhouses have largely ignored some critically important questions. Will the administration hold anyone accountable for the illegal activities that have been revealed? What does the extreme abuse of Manning's civil liberties and human rights mean for the rest of us? The American press has absorbed the Pentagon's claims that Manning somehow caused grave harm to our national security, even though several internal administration assessments found no such threat.
Finally, our web video of the week, Almost Gone, the Ballad of Bradley Manning. This song was co-written by Graham Nash, who was the Nash in Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. He made his name in a different era, when protest songs were common, anti-war protests in the U.S. were big, and the U.S. news media were much less corporate and actually covered the story. This video has some pretty bold graphics, some disturbing images, and a few harsh facts. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.